A 20th century malady. He looked a sad young man, and we wanted to be kind to him. When he moved into the house next to ours, my wife, Janet, said,
"I think he's sad because he lives alone. I feel sorry for him."
We live in a semi-detached house outside a village. The house next to ours was empty for a long time, and then the young man came. He arrived in a van with a few pieces of furniture. Then we didn't see him very much. Sometimes he went for a walk in the country, and every day he walked to the village to do some shopping. He always walked. He didn't have a car.
"Perhaps he's too poor to buy a car,"
said Janet.
"Let's take him into the village tomorrow."
So next day, when he came out of the house to go shopping, I offered him a lift.
"No, thank you,"
he replied.
"I prefer to walk."
We looked surprised. "But it's over a mile to the village," I said. He smiled.
"I like walking."
And he walked on.
"He's just shy, poor boy,"
Janet said. So we tried again. Next time he came out, we were waiting in the car. We said that we were going to the village and offered him a lift. He looked away quickly. Was he angry or shy?
"Thank you very much, but I prefer to walk,"
he said, and he walked on. Janet was surprised, but she continued to think about how to help the young man.
"He's very thin,"
she said one evening.
"I'm sure he doesn't eat good food. We must invite him to dinner."
Janet and I like good food. We eat a lot of butter and puddings and cream and sweet things like cakes. We know this rich food is fattening, but we like it. So we're a bit overweight. The young man opened the door. Janet was right. He was thin. He looked at me in silence a moment and smiled.
"Thank you. You're very kind, but I can only eat certain food. I have a special diet."
What sort of diet?
"Oh, fruit, vegetables, bread."
Are you a vegetarian?
"Yes, I am."
My wife is a very good cook, I said. She can cook a delicious vegetarian dinner. Please come. He looked away and said nothing. You must come, I insisted. My wife will be very disappointed. He thought a moment.
"Okay, I'll come,"
he said. He didn't look very happy about it. But Janet was very happy. She cooked a wonderful vegetarian meal. But she put butter in the vegetables. And she also made a big fruit pudding with lots of sugar and cream.
He must eat some real food,
she said. That evening, we learnt the young man's name. Richard. He didn't talk much, but we also learnt that he was 28. He couldn't find a job, and he didn't have much money. His parents were dead, and he didn't have any brothers or sisters. We felt sorry for him. He didn't eat much that evening. He said he wasn't hungry. Janet was a little offended.
I cooked all that horrible vegetarian food for him, and he left it on his plate. And he didn't drink any wine either.
Yes, Janet was a bit angry. But she quickly forgot about it. Then she began to think about Richard again.
Poor boy, he's all alone in that house,
she said.
He hasn't got any friends and he hasn't got a girlfriend. It's terrible. What does he do all evening?
She looked at me sadly. He watches telly, like us. Suddenly, she had an idea.
We must invite him to come and watch telly with us. That will cheer him up.
I think he likes to be alone, Janet, I said. He's a quiet person.
But he isn't happy. I can see it.
How? He doesn't speak or laugh much, but I think he's happy.
Well, I say he isn't happy, Reg. You must go and bring him here this evening. I want him to be happy.
So I went out into the cold, wet night and knocked on Richard's door. "Would you like to come round to us?" I asked. He smiled.
Why?
We can watch telly and have a bit of food." He suddenly looked frightened.
No, not telly. I never watch it.
His face was very white. Now I was really surprised. "Well, perhaps you want some company,"
I like my own company.
he said, and he shut the door quickly. When I told Janet, she was furious.
Who does he think he is? We only want to be kind to him.
At 3 o'clock the next morning, she woke me up.
Hey, Reg, wake up. I've got a great idea.
She cried, a big, happy smile on her face.
We'll have a big party with all our friends and relatives. We'll tell Richard that there will be a lot of noise and invite him to come.
I didn't like the idea. "I'm not going to invite him this time. Good night, dear." So Janet invited Richard to the party. He couldn't say no, poor boy. But Janet told him he had to come, and he came. But I could see he wasn't happy. There was loud music and dancing, lots of delicious, fattening food, cigarette smoke, and bottles of alcoholic drink. Our friends and relatives are all very kind, and they pushed plates of food and glasses of drink in front of Richard's nose, and he couldn't say no. When I saw him about midnight, he looked terrible. His face was white with panic. People were shouting, singing, and dancing all around him. He couldn't escape. Then, about 15 minutes later, he wasn't there. "Where's Richard?" I asked Janet.
Oh, he had to go,
She replied.
He said he wasn't feeling well. What a pity. He was enjoying the party so much.
A few nights later, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, I couldn't believe my eyes. It was Richard. He was standing in the wind and rain. He was as white as a sheet. His eyes were dark and strange.
Could you phone a doctor?
He said in a quiet voice.
I'm not feeling well.
I told him to come in and sit down. While I phoned, Janet made a cup of tea. Then she sat on the sofa with Richard. She was happy again.
What's the matter?
She asked.
I feel hot. I've got a headache, and my heart is beating fast.
Oh, you poor thing,
Janet said tenderly. Dr. Rockall arrived soon and examined Richard. He said,
You've got a fever, and your heartbeat is not regular. You must rest. Stay in bed for a few days. Relax, and eat plenty of good food. Here's some medicine for the fever.
At the door, he said to me,
It may be a virus, or perhaps an allergy. If he isn't better in a few days, call me.
Of course, Janet was really happy. She wanted Richard to sleep in our house, but he said no. He wanted to go back to his house. So we took him next door and put him to bed. Now we could see inside the house for the first time, and we were amazed. He had tables, chairs, a sofa and armchair, carpets, bookcases, pictures, cupboards, etc. But there was no television set, no video recorder, no phone, no home computer, no hi-fi. There was nothing modern, not even electric lights. He had big candles in all the rooms. He took the medicine and quickly fell asleep.
I'm going to stay here and look after him,
said Janet.
Oh, look at this place. The poor boy hasn't got enough money to buy a telly. Let's get our old TV set. He can watch it in bed.
But Janet, he doesn't like TV. But she wasn't listening to me. I knew why she was doing these strange things. We haven't got any children, and she wanted to give Richard all the kindness of a mother. When he woke up and saw the TV at the end of the bed, he looked frightened. He tried to move and speak, but he was weak.
The doctor said you must rest,
smiled Janet.
So be a good boy. Relax and watch TV. There's a quiz show and then cartoons, then a comedy show, a soap opera and an old film. A thriller, I think.
She made his pillow comfortable and pulled the bedclothes tight. He couldn't move. He stared at the TV with great frightened eyes, like a rabbit in front of a snake.
Are you hungry, Richard?
said Janet. He tried to move his head, but it was difficult.
Good. You look so white and thin. You need some real food.
Richard tried to shake his head. There was terror in his eyes.
No, I won't listen to you, Richard. You're going to eat and eat and eat. Then you'll get big and strong.
Janet cooked some cream of chicken soup and eggs and toast with lots of butter.
Come on, don't be naughty, Richard. Open your mouth. That's right, eat up.
And Janet began to push the food into his mouth. She stayed with Richard for 6 days and nights. She slept in the next room. She got a mobile phone for emergencies, but she called lots of friends and relatives and asked them to come and visit Richard. The phone was always ringing. People came and went, and it was very noisy. Then she got an old radio cassette player from our house, and Richard had to listen to music or radio programs. She even decided to hire a video recorder. Richard was Janet's prisoner. He did everything she wanted. For 6 days, he stayed in bed and watched TV and video films, or listened to loud music and the talk of visitors. His eyes were like glass. His face had no expression. He was like a zombie. Janet cooked him 3 big meals a day, and he began to get fat. But he didn't get better. After 10 days, he was very weak. He didn't move, and he didn't speak. He only stared in front of him.
Why doesn't he get better?
Janet asked Dr. Rockall.
It's strange. He looks better. He isn't thin and white now. Has he eaten well?
Oh, yes. Lots and lots of good food.
The fever has gone down, but his heart is still bad. I can't understand it. Look at his eyes. They look strange. Perhaps he's asleep.
Oh, what shall we do, Doctor?
Janet cried.
Well, we can't take him to hospital. There aren't any free beds. We have to wait a few days. Perhaps I'll contact one of my colleagues in Germany. Call me if there's any change.
There was a change. 2 days later, a man arrived at our house. He was tall and strong, with a great black beard and a red face.
My name is Dr. Hans von Ruprecht,
he said in a loud voice. He had a German accent.
I am a good friend and colleague of Dr. Rockall. He phoned me yesterday about the mysterious malady of his patient, Richard Jeffries. I had a patient in Germany with a similar malady. Is Mr. Jeffries getting better?
No, I said. He's becoming a vegetable.
A vegetable?
Yes. Vegetables aren't very lively, are they? I replied. Do you know what's the matter with Richard?
Not precisely. But if my analysis is correct, it may be a new illness that has appeared only in the 20th century. We don't know much about it, but we have found that emissions from electronic objects like televisions, computers, videos, hi-fis, etc. probably cause it. It seems that the waves from these machines are not good for the brain and nerves. They change or disturb the electrical functions, but we don't know precisely how or why. There is fever and rapid heartbeats. The patient gradually passes into a coma.
Like a vegetable.
Yes. One strange symptom is that the patient wants to eat and drink a lot. Usually fattening food, all the things that we eat today. So the patient becomes fat. We don't know why people need to eat a lot. Perhaps there are psychological causes. Nobody has done any experiments, and nobody has written a scientific study. But we know the final result of the malady. The patient will die.
At that moment, there was a long, terrible scream from next door. Dr. von Ruprecht and I ran out of the house. Janet was coming out of Richard's house. She was crying. When I asked her what was wrong, she couldn't answer. I put my arms around her, and the doctor went into Richard's house. A few minutes later, he came out.
He's dead,
he announced quietly.
I found this under the pillow.
It was an envelope. I opened it. There was a letter in it. I read it out to the others.
I'm going to die soon, and I know that it's the 20th century that is killing me. 10 years ago, when I was 18, I was a very different person. I had a teenager's lifestyle. I went to discos with my friends every evening. I listened to loud music. I watched a lot of TV and videos. I liked computer games. I was always talking on the phone. Then something happened. I began to feel ill. I had bad headaches. My heartbeat was rapid. Sometimes I felt dizzy. I often had a temperature. I couldn't do my schoolwork. I didn't know why I was ill. I went to a doctor, but he didn't know either. He said perhaps it was my lifestyle. I thought a lot about this. It was true that I never walked. I went everywhere by car. It was true that I drank a lot of alcohol and ate bad food. It was true that I watched a lot of stupid TV programs, game shows, talk shows, and hundreds of bad films. It was true that my ears weren't good because the music in the discos was very loud. It was true that I sat for hours in front of my computer, and it was true that I had started doing all these things when I was very young, about 14. I took a lot of pills and medicine, but I didn't get better. I became fat and very lazy. I never went out, except in the car. At weekends, I sat in front of the TV all day, or listened to music, and I ate and drank and ate. I lived like a zombie. I never used my brain. It was full of the rubbish from TV programs, silly songs, and terrible films. I became very weak and very ill, with a temperature and heart problems. Then suddenly I understood. One day, I had a little accident in the car and hit my head. It wasn't serious, but my mind became clear and I saw everything. I saw that the 20th century was slowly killing me. So, I changed my lifestyle. I stopped living like a zombie. It was very difficult. My lifestyle was a habit, a very dangerous habit like taking drugs. Life at the end of the 20th century was killing my mind and my body. So I began to walk everywhere. I didn't watch TV or listen to stupid music. I sold my computer and my video recorder. I didn't go to discos. I stopped eating bad food and drinking too much alcohol. And I lost all my friends, too. But the 20th century was everywhere. It was too strong, and I had to escape from it. So I came here to the country. But I couldn't escape. The 20th century is too strong. I can't fight it. I know I'm going to die soon. Goodbye. Richard Jeffries.
When I finished, Dr. von Ruprecht said sadly,
So, now we know that this is an illness of the mind, caused by living in the 20th century. Can I take this letter with me, please? I want to write a report about Richard's case and publish it. Then all the world will know.
But before the doctor could finish, poor Janet fell to the ground with a strange cry.
Ooh.
Von Ruprecht examined her, then looked at me.
She has got a temperature. Her heartbeat is very fast.
He shook his head sadly.
Being detectives. The next thing that happened to us was very interesting. It was as real as the half-crowns, not just pretending. I shall try to write it as like a real book as I can. Of course we have read Mr. Sherlock Holmes, as well as the yellow-covered books with pictures outside that are so badly printed, and you get them for 4 pence halfpenny at the bookstall when the corners of them are beginning to curl up and get dirty, with people looking to see how the story ends when they are waiting for trains. I think this is most unfair to the boy at the bookstall. The books are written by a gentleman named Gaboriau, and Albert's uncle says they are the worst translations in the world, and written in vile English. Of course they're not like Kipling, but they're jolly good stories. And we had just been reading a book by Dick Didlington. That's not his right name, but I know all about libel actions, so I shall not say what his name is really, because his books are rot. Only they put it into our heads to do what I'm going to narrate. It was in September, and we were not going to go to the seaside because it is so expensive, even if you go to Sheerness, where it is all tin cans and old boots and no sand at all. But everyone else went, even the people next door. Not Albert's side, but the other. Their servant told Eliza they were all going to Scarborough, and next day, sure enough, all the blinds were down and the shutters up, and the milk was not left any more. There is a big horse-chestnut tree between their garden and ours, very useful for getting conkers out of and for making stuff to rub on your chilblains. This prevented our seeing whether the blinds were down at the back as well, but Dicky climbed to the top of the tree and looked, and they were. It was jolly hot weather, and very stuffy indoors. We used to play a good deal in the garden. We made a tent out of the kitchen clothes-horse and some blankets off our beds, and though it was quite as hot in the tent as in the house, it was a very different sort of hotness. Albert's uncle called it the Turkish bath. It is not nice to be kept from the seaside, but we know that we have much to be thankful for. We might be poor little children living in a crowded alley, where even at summer noon hardly a ray of sunlight penetrates, clothed in rags and with bare feet, though I do not mind holes in my clothes myself, and Bare feet would not be at all bad in this sort of weather. Indeed, we do sometimes when we are playing at things which require it. It was shipwrecked mariners that day, I remember, and we were all in the blanket tent. We had just finished eating the things we had saved, at the peril of our lives, from the sinking vessel. They were rather nice things. 2 pennyworth of coconut candy. It was got in Greenwich, where it is 4 ounces a penny. 3 apples, some macaroni, the straight sort that is so useful to suck things through, some raw rice, and a large piece of cold suet pudding that Alice nicked from the larder when she went to get the rice and macaroni. And when we had finished, someone said, "I should like to be a detective." I wish to be quite fair, but I cannot remember exactly who said it. Oswald thinks he said it, and Dora says it was Dicky, but Oswald is too much of a man to quarrel about a little thing like that. "I should like to be a detective," said, perhaps it was Dicky, but I think not, "and find out strange and hidden crimes." "You have to be much cleverer than you are," said H.O. "Not so very," Alice said, "because when you've read the books you know what the things mean. The red hair on the handle of the knife, or the grains of white powder on the velvet collar of the villain's overcoat. I believe we could do it." "I shouldn't like to have anything to do with murders," said Dora. "Somehow it doesn't seem safe. And it always ends in the poor murderer being hanged," said Alice. We explained to her why murderers have to be hanged, but she only said, "I don't care. I'm sure no one would ever do murdering twice. Think of the blood and things, and what you would see when you woke up in the night. I shouldn't mind being a detective to lie in wait for a gang of coiners now, and spring upon them unawares and secure them, single-handed, you know, or with only my faithful bloodhound." She stroked Pincher's ears, but he had gone to sleep because he knew well enough that all the suet pudding was finished. He is a very sensible dog. "You always get hold of the wrong end of the stick," Oswald said. "You can't choose what crimes you'll be a detective about. You just have to get a suspicious circumstance, and then you look for a clue and follow it up. Whether it turns out a murder or a missing will is just a fluke." "That's one way," Dicky said. "Another is to get a paper and find 2 advertisements or bits of news that fit, like this: 'Young lady missing,' and then it tells about all the clothes she had on, and the gold locket she wore, and the colour of her hair and all that. And then in another piece of paper you see 'Gold locket found,' and then it all comes out." We sent H.O. for the paper at once, but we could not make any of the things fit in. The 2 best were about how some burglars broke into a place in Holloway where they made preserved tongues and invalid delicacies, and carried off a lot of them. And on another page there was "Mysterious Deaths in Holloway." Oswald thought there was something in it, and so did Albert's uncle when we asked him, but the others thought not, so Oswald agreed to drop it. Besides, Holloway is a long way off. All the time we were talking about the paper, Alice seemed to be thinking about something else, and when we had done, she said, "I believe we might be detectives ourselves, but I should not like to get anybody into trouble." "Not murderers or robbers?" Dicky asked. "It wouldn't be murderers," she said, "but I have noticed something strange, only I feel a little frightened. Let's ask Albert's uncle first." Alice is a jolly sight too fond of asking grown-up people things, and we all said it was tommy-rot, and she was to tell us. "Well, promise you won't do anything without me," Alice said, and we promised. Then she said, "This is a dark secret, and anyone who thinks it is better not to be involved in a career of crime discovery had better go away ere yet it be too late." So Dora said she had had enough of tents, and she was going to look at the shops. H.O. went with her because he had twopence to spend. They thought it was only a game of Alice's, but Oswald knew by the way she spoke. He can nearly always tell. And when people are not telling the truth, Oswald generally knows by the way they look with their eyes. Oswald is not proud of being able to do this. He knows it is through no merit of his own that he is much cleverer than some people. When they had gone, the rest of us got closer together and said, "Now then." "Well," Alice said, "you know the house next door? The people have gone to Scarborough, and the house is shut up. But last night I saw a light in the windows." We asked her how and when, because her room is in the front, and she couldn't possibly have seen. But then she said, "I'll tell you if you boys will promise not ever to go fishing again without me." So we had to promise. Then she said, "It was last night. I had forgotten to feed my rabbits, and I woke up and remembered it, and I was afraid I should find them dead in the morning, like Oswald did." "It wasn't my fault," Oswald said. "There was something the matter with the beasts. I fed them right enough." Alice said she didn't mean that, and she went on, "I came down into the garden, and I saw a light in the house, and dark figures moving about. I thought perhaps it was burglars, but Father hadn't come home and Eliza had gone to bed, so I couldn't do anything. Only I thought perhaps I would tell the rest of you." "Why didn't you tell us this morning?" Noel asked, and Alice explained that she didn't want to get anyone into trouble, even burglars. "But we might watch tonight," she said, "and see if we see the light again." "They might have been burglars," Noel said. He was sucking the last bit of his macaroni. "You know the people next door are very grand. They won't know us, and they go out in real private carriage sometimes. And they have an at-home day, and people come in cabs. I dare say they have piles of plate and jewellery and rich brocades and furs of price and things like that. Let us keep watch tonight." "It's no use watching tonight," Dickie said. "If it's only burglars, they won't come again. But there are other things besides burglars that are discovered in empty houses where lights are seen moving." "You mean coiners?" said Oswald at once. "I wonder what the reward is for setting the police on their track." Dickie thought it ought to be something fat, because coiners are always a desperate gang, and the machinery they make the coins with is so heavy and handy for knocking down detectives. Then it was tea time, and we went in, and Dora and H.O. had clubbed their money together and bought a melon, quite a big one, and only a little bit squashy at one end. It was very good, and then we washed the seeds and made things with them, with pins and cotton. And nobody said anything more about watching the house next door. Only when we went to bed, Dickie took off his coat and waistcoat, but he stopped at his braces and said, "What about the coiners?" Oswald had taken off his collar and tie, and he was just going to say the same, so he said, "Of course I meant to watch, only my collar's rather tight, so I thought I'd take it off first." Dickie said he did not think the girls ought to be in it, because there might be danger, but Oswald reminded him that they had promised Alice, and that a promise is a sacred thing, even when you'd much rather not. So Oswald got Alice alone under pretence of showing her a caterpillar. Dora does not like them, and she screamed and ran away when Oswald offered to show it her. Then Oswald explained, and Alice agreed to come and watch if she could. This made us later than we ought to have been, because Alice had to wait till Dora was quiet and then creep out very slowly, for fear of the boards creaking. The girls sleep with their room door open for fear of burglars. Alice had kept on her clothes under her nightgown when Dora wasn't looking, and presently we got down, creeping past Father's study, and out the glass door that leads on to the veranda and the iron steps into the garden. And we went down very quietly and got into the chestnut tree, and then I felt that we had only been playing what Albert's uncle calls our favourite instrument. I mean the fool. for the house next door was as dark as dark. Then suddenly we heard a sound. It came from the gate at the end of the garden. All the gardens have gates. They lead into a kind of lane that runs behind them. It is a sort of back way, very convenient when you don't want to say exactly where you are going. We heard the gate at the end of the next garden click, and Dickie nudged Alice so that she would have fallen out of the tree if it had not been for Oswald's extraordinary presence of mind. Oswald squeezed Alice's arm tight, and we all looked. And the others were rather frightened, because really we had not exactly expected anything to happen except perhaps a light. But now a muffled figure, shrouded in a dark cloak, came swiftly up the path of the next-door garden, and we could see that under its cloak the figure carried a mysterious burden. The figure was dressed to look like a woman in a sailor hat. We held our breath as it passed under the tree where we were, and then it tapped very gently on the back door and was let in, and then a light appeared in the window of the downstairs back breakfast room. But the shutters were up. Dickie said, "My eye!" and wouldn't the others be sick to think they hadn't seen this? But Alice didn't half like it, and as she is a girl I do not blame her. Indeed, I thought myself at first that perhaps it would be better to retire for the present and return later with a strongly armed force. "It's not burglars," Alice whispered. "The mysterious stranger was bringing things in, not taking them out. They must be coiners. And oh, Oswald, don't let's. The things they coin with must hurt very much. Do let's go to bed." But Dickie said he was going to see. If there was a reward for finding out things like this, he would like to have the reward. "They locked the back door," he whispered. "I heard it go, and I could look in quite well through the holes in the shutters and be back over the wall long before they got the door open, even if they started to do it at once." There were holes at the top of the shutters the shape of hearts, and the yellow light came out through them as well as through the chinks of the shutters. Oswald said if Dickie went he should, because he was the eldest, and Alice said, "If anyone goes it ought to be me, because I thought of it." So Oswald said, "Well, go then," and she said, "Not for anything," and she begged us not to, and we talked about it in the tree till we were all quite hoarse with whispering. At last we decided on a plan of action. Alice was to stay in the tree and scream "murder" if anything happened. Dickie and I were to get down into the next garden and take it in turns to peep. So we got down as quietly as we could, but the tree made much more noise than it does in the day, and several times we paused, fearing that all was discovered. But nothing happened. There was a pile of red flower pots under the window, and one very large one was on the window ledge. It seemed as if it was the hand of destiny had placed it there, and the geranium in it was dead, and there was nothing to stop you standing on it, so Oswald did. He went first because he is the eldest, and though Dickie tried to stop him because he thought of it first, it could not be, on account of not being able to say anything. So Oswald stood on the flower pot and tried to look through one of the holes. He did not really expect to see the coiners at their fell work, though he had pretended to when we were talking in the tree. But if he had seen them pouring the base molten metal into tin moulds the shape of half-crowns, he would not have been half so astonished as he was at the spectacle now revealed. At first he could see little, because the hole had unfortunately been made a little too high, so that the eye of the detective could only see the prodigal sun in a shiny frame on the opposite wall. But Oswald held on to the window frame and stood on tiptoe, and then he saw. There was no furnace, and no base metal, no bearded men in leathern aprons with tongs and things, but just a table with a tablecloth on it for supper, and a tin of salmon and a lettuce and some bottled beer. and there on a chair was the cloak and the hat of the mysterious stranger, and the two people sitting at the table were the two youngest grown-up daughters of the lady next door, and one of them was saying, "So I got the salmon 3 halfpence cheaper, and the lettuces are only 6 a penny in the Broadway. Just fancy! We must save as much as ever we can on our housekeeping money if we want to go away decent next year." And the other said, "I wish we could all go every year, or else, really, I almost wish—" And all the time Oswald was looking, Dickie was pulling at his jacket to make him get down and let Dickie have a squint. And just as she said, "I almost," Dickie pulled too hard, and Oswald felt himself toppling on the giddy verge of the big flower-pots. Putting forth all his strength, our hero strove to recover his what's-its-name, but it was now lost beyond recall. "You've done it this time," he said, and then he fell heavily among the flower-pots piled below. He heard them crash and rattle and crack, and then his head struck against an iron pillar used for holding up the next-door veranda. His eyes closed, and he knew no more. Now you will perhaps expect that at this moment Alice would have cried "Murder!" If you think so, you little know what girls are. Directly she was left alone in that tree, she made a bolt to tell Albert's uncle all about it and bring him to our rescue in case the coiner's gang was a very desperate one. And just when I fell, Albert's uncle was getting over the wall. Alice never screamed at all when Oswald fell, but Dickie thinks he heard Albert's uncle say, "Confound those kids," which would not have been kind or polite, so I hope he did not say it. The people next door did not come out to see what the row was. Albert's uncle did not wait for them to come out. He picked up Oswald and carried the insensible body of the gallant young detective to the wall, laid it on the top, and then climbed over and bore his lifeless burden into our house and put it on the sofa in Father's study. Father was out, so we needn't have crept so when we were getting into the garden. Then Oswald was restored to consciousness and his head tied up and sent to bed, and next day there was a lump on his young brow as big as a turkey's egg, and very uncomfortable. Albert's uncle came in next day and talked to each of us separately. To Oswald he said many unpleasant things about ungentlemanly to spy on ladies, and about minding your own business, and when I began to tell him what I had heard he told me to shut up, and altogether he made me more uncomfortable than the lump did. Oswald did not say anything to anyone, but next day, as the shadows of eve were falling, he crept away and wrote on a piece of paper, "I want to speak to you," and shoved it through the hole like a heart in the top of the next-door shutters. And the youngest young lady put an eye to the heart-shaped hole, and then opened the shutter and said, "Well?" very crossly. Then Oswald said, "I'm very sorry, and I beg your pardon. We wanted to be detectives, and we thought a gang of coiners infested your house, so we looked through your window last night. I saw the lettuce, and I heard what you said about the salmon being 3 halfpence cheaper, and I know it is very dishonourable to pry into other people's secrets, especially ladies, and I never will again if you will forgive me this once." Then the lady frowned, and then she laughed, and then she said, "So it was you tumbling into the flower-pots last night. We thought it was burglars. It frightened us horribly. Why, what a bump on your poor head." And then she talked to me a bit, and presently she said she and her sister had not wished people to know they were at home because— And then she stopped short and grew very red, and I said, "I thought you were all at Scarborough. Your servant told Eliza so. Why didn't you want people to know you were at home?" The lady got redder still, and then she laughed and said, "Never mind the reason why. I hope your head doesn't hurt much. Thank you for your nice, manly little speech. You've nothing to be ashamed of at any rate." Then she kissed me, and I did not mind. And then she said, "Run away now, dear. I'm going to— I'm going to pull up the blinds and open the shutters, and I want to do it at once before it gets dark, so that everyone can see we're at home and not at Scarborough."